Beginner and intermediate artists, myself included, are often always looking for ways they can get better or learn something new, and one of the ways we always gravitate towards is asking other artists for advice, because they might give you a perspective you didn't consider before, and if their skill level is what you aspire to reach, then you want to figure out what things they do that you don't. But my personal opinion is that a lot of the art advice that circulates around is just not things that I can agree with, and bear in mind these are just my opinions, and I'm not a professional, so it's not like I'm in a position where I can credibly hand out too much advice myself. There are just some things that at a glance I disagree with, so I'll be talking about that today and explaining my views. 1. Draw from your head and don't use references. When I was a kid in early middle school, I genuinely thought that using references was criminal, and I would avoid using them whenever possible because I was afraid of stealing. This is just not true in my opinion. Would you tell someone to figure out mathematical concepts from their head and reasoning rather than learning from a teacher because you shouldn't be stealing the teacher's ideas? Why would you tell an artist that learning from someone else is wrong? Obviously, you shouldn't be tracing or heavy referencing without citing the original artist, but using references is just how you learn to draw. In my opinion, refusing to use references will just heavily stunt your ability to improve. If there are artists that you look up to, I bet that if you were to ask them, they'd probably tell you that yes, they reference to develop their skills. 2. Don't use your art style as an excuse for unrealistic proportions or bad artistic choices. Something that I've heard a lot while watching random videos and just existing in this community is people making fun of artists who say, "It's just my art style," in response to criticism. Like if someone pointed out that an artist drew eyes that were unrealistically large and the artist defended themselves by saying it was just how they did things. I do think that sometimes this is an excuse to avoid broadening knowledge in certain areas, but if an artist says this, it probably means that they don't want to make these changes and they're comfortable with where their style is at that moment. Does that mean they'll never change it? Probably not, since artists have a very consistent habit of entirely reworking their style every other month. So I feel like it's unnecessary to give out unrequested criticism and then make fun of someone because they decided that they didn't want to take that advice. I've noticed that a lot of the people who deal out this criticism aren't experienced artists themselves, or sometimes aren't even artists at all, because artists who have been drawing for a while realize that a style that an artist feels fully comfortable with can only be found through individual experimentation. There will be phases that might just not look that great, or at least not look great in your opinion, but they're necessary for an artist to find out what they want their style to look like. It also goes without saying that art is subjective, and cartoon art is all about exaggeration and omission of certain traits. There are many popular shows and animes that have defining art styles, and while you can go into detail about how certain character traits are unrealistic, I don't personally think it would always make the show better if they changed these things. If they specifically asked for criticism and then reacted in that way when they received it, then yeah, that's a little different than if the criticism was unrequested, and it is kind of weird to respond this way, but they don't have to agree with all the criticism they receive. It feels a little entitled to say that an artist can't take criticism because they decided that they prefer the way they currently do things over adapting to suit your specific taste in art. Your taste isn't always objectively the best or correct. They don't have to make these changes. It doesn't necessarily make them a bad artist because they don't want to do things the way you want them to. If you don't like their art, then why make them insecure and try to force them to fit your definition of a good artist when you can just find another artist that enjoys drawing things the way you enjoy them to look? At the end of the day, yeah, if a young artist says that it's just their art style, they probably don't know the rule that they're breaking. But art is a hobby and they shouldn't feel obligated to change their art style to suit some random guy's liking if that's the way they feel most comfortable expressing themselves. 3. Art will never be a well-paying job and should remain a hobby. This is something I've gladly noticed that people have begun to say less and less, but this advice is so detrimental and I hate hearing it. If you were super interested in art as a kid and wanted to pursue it for a living, but was told by your parents that you shouldn't do so because it is very unlikely to work out, so you completely dismissed it as a career possibility, then this is for you. That information is untrue and incredibly out of date. In the current day and age, there are so many opportunities for artists, many of which pay just fine. You aren't limited to trying to get into an art gallery anymore. There are other ways to make your passion into your career. So many companies need graphic designers, so many animation companies, both indie and well-known, are on the lookout to hire new animators, and there is a huge amount of people, mainly furries really, online who are more than willing to drop a ton of money on you to draw their character. I'm not saying that it'll pay super duper well and you'll never have money struggles or anything, but if art is something that you want to do, then you can find a way to make it work. It's not like adults have malicious intentions when they tell you not to go after art as a job, and they're probably just looking out for you, but they are basing this off of information from decades ago. And with the explosion of technology and marketing and such, I promise you that there are so many people who want artists. 4. Stop doing things a certain way. This kind of ties into the art style thing from earlier in the video. I couldn't think of a better way to phrase this, but what irks me a lot is when people deliberately tell you to stop drawing something a certain way, as if that will automatically make your art quote-unquote better. And it's crazy to me that we as a community take certain things as facts when they're not really. For For example, a lot of people will tell you never to shade with black because it'll make your art look murky or gross and will be more vibrant or realistic looking if you shade with different colors. Now me personally, for my art style, I do use colors to shade. I like to shade with hot pink on multiply, unless the colors in the character I'm drawing call for a different shading method. But does this mean I think you should never shade with black? No, not really. Not everyone wants a vibrant or lively looking style. Some people enjoy a style that looks quote-unquote murky. Not to mention that comic books use a style where shading is done with solid black or black hash lines. Another one is to not shade with an airbrush. This is something that beginner artists default to doing because when you first get your hand on a tool like Ibis Paint or something, the airbrush looks like a crazy cool tool, and a lot of people use it whenever and wherever they can when they first start out. And while I do think that sometimes in a piece it does look a little overused, I don't think that means you can never shade with an airbrush. You could use an airbrush in a large setting for a very gradual gradient. Or people like myself who enjoy what might be regarded as a cringy MS Paint style might just like the look of airbrush shading. The tools in your art program are there for you to use, and you should use them how you want to. When it comes to this type of art advice, the important thing to keep in mind is that art is subjective. There is art that you like and art that you don't like, but that doesn't mean that everyone will agree with you. I adore bright colors in art, and there may be people who absolutely hate brightly saturated colors. I'm not a fan of natural color palettes in animal-like designs, but there might be people who love these types of designs and that's their favorite type of design. It varies from person to person. All these specific tips like this are just so hit or miss. 5. Just practice. This is something I was hesitant to add because so many people have probably talked about this already, but I asked my server and a couple people mentioned that they disliked when people said this, so I thought I'd talk about it as well. This isn't inherently bad advice, mind you. I have said this to people when they asked me for art advice when I'm in the middle of doing something else and I have to generate something on a whim. The problem with saying just practice isn't that it isn't true, but because it just isn't specific enough. When I tell someone that the best thing they can do is practice, what I'm really saying is they should keep going, because if they stop drawing, they aren't going to get any better, and they should try and turn art into a hobby they enjoy if it's something they really want to do. But telling someone to just practice can also make them feel worse about their abilities, especially if they're just starting out, because they probably have already tried to draw things and have been unsatisfied with the result. And hearing someone say just practice when that's what they're already doing can come off as if they just can't get better. It's worth mentioning that it's not like if you just keep practicing, you'll get better linearly. What you're specifically practicing does affect how much you'll improve. If you draw the same eye over and over again, or the same anime girl you have referenced 5 times and then drilled into your memory so you can replicate it again without looking at the original image, you're not gonna get better, really. Although, if that's what you want to draw, and that's what makes you happy, you should keep doing it. I'm sure if I tried new things more frequently, I'd probably improve my skills a lot faster. But I enjoy drawing what I'm drawing, and that is just what I want to do with art. I don't think just practice is bad advice necessarily, it's just kind of unhelpful. And while more experienced artists may agree that this is pretty much what you should be doing, beginning artists won't be able to take that much away from it. The reason why artists will tell you this is because that's kind of how their trajectory feels when you're looking back on it. They think back to elementary school when they first took up art and drew really awful looking stuff, and then every year they improved bit by bit. So it feels like what they did was just practice. But in reality, again, your improvement just won't be linear. Something I do want to mention is that being put in the position where someone is asking you for art advice is awkward and sometimes difficult. Sometimes people ask in my stream chat, do you have any art advice? And there's not much else I can say unless a more specific question is asked. I always feel bad when people are unsatisfied with the answer that I give, but there's just so little that I can respond with. Try to figure out what you're having trouble with the most and then approach an artist with this question, because they'll probably have more tips to guide you in the right direction. If you don't know where to start, ask for advice on starting a drawing or finding the right pose. If you don't know how to shade once you've put all the colors down, ask for advice on that. In the end of the day, you do have to practice, but what you should be practicing varies from person to person, because it depends on what you want to draw and what you struggle with the most. Anyways, those were the things that came to my mind first. Sorry if my voice is a little dead, I'm kind of thirsty and I don't have anything to drink right now. If there were things that I missed, please feel free to share your own thoughts in the comments or your experiences with the things I mentioned, because I love reading them. By the way, I promise I'm working on that character descriptions video, but it just might take a while to release it because I'm gonna be a bit busy this summer. I'll release an update about that next week. Also, thank you for roughly 1.5k. That's super duper cool and brings a smile to my face. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.